Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's continue on with this Python tutorial. In this video, we're going to be going over a list. Alright, so a Python list allows for the grouping of data. The data within this list is comma separated between each value and is within square brackets. A list can contain various types, such as a string, a number, or a boolean. Now I place an example of a list, and it's stored in a list val variable, and as you guys can see, it's within a square bracket, and you can see there's various data types. So we have a number, we have a string, we have a boolean, which is true, and then we have a float, which is 5.5. A list is mutable, however, so we can change the value within the list. So we're not just restricted to just having these values when it's created. If you ever want to change it, you could change it. Now, to access a list is very similar to a string. Before we went over strings, which are just a sequence of characters, and each character is just denoted by an index, and the index usually starts at 0 to denote the first value, while the ending value is just the length minus 1. So if we have a list of 5 values, to retrieve the last value you can use the length minus 1, so the last value will be 4. So in this case we have a list val which holds 4 values. So to get the last value you could use the index of 3, because the length minus 1 is 3. To get the first value, which is 1, in this case it will be 0. So you guys can see that to retrieve a value you just use the square bracket and then place the index value inside of it. And I showed an example of retrieving number 1, which is just list val, open up the brackets and use 0. And it pretty much can use the same, it's pretty much using the same logic as a string, where if I wanted to retrieve the last value without actually knowing the length of the list itself, I can use -1. That will retrieve the last value within the list. We also have the capability of taking a piece of the list, so we can use slicing, and the left value specifies where we want to start, or if we already know you want to start from the beginning, we don't even have to place a value there. We can just paste the colon and the ending value, which in this case is 2, but it doesn't actually retrieve the value of the index at 2. It just lets Python know that this is the range that I want, not including that number. So in this case it will be going from 0 to 2, but not including the index 2. It's just 0 and 1. So in this case it's just going to return a sublist of number 1 and geo, because that's the values within a 0 index and 1 index, and it's going to be in its own list. So in Python we also have nested lists, or we can also call it multi-dimensional. If you guys ever took a math class, you guys can think of columns and rows when thinking about multi-dimensional list or nested list, because you'll have columns which are vertical and rows which are horizontal. So just a quick example, we have a example of players, which is a list within a list, and the list within the list is just holding data regarding a player. So we have the name of the player and their jersey number. Now, to access the value within this nested list, we have to specify we have to use two square brackets, one to denote the row and another to denote the column. So if I want to get the first player's name, right, I know that, for example, geo is in the first row while the name is in the first column. So I feel like the image on the left will really help, because you could just think of that how rows are horizontal while columns are vertical. So I can see that geo is in the first row because it's the first value or first list within this multi-dimensional list, and to get the first value within that list that we're choosing, which is in the first row, we have to denote the index. So in this case there's only a length of 2 within that list, so we can either choose the value of 0 or we can use the value of 1 as the index. So if I want to retrieve the name in the first row, I have to use 0 in the first square bracket and 0 in the second bracket, and that's how I retrieve the name geo from the first list. So if I know I want to retrieve the value Bob, I know that Bob is the second list inside this multi-dimensional list, so I know that a list only goes up to length -1. So to get the second one, I would have to use the index of 1 in the first bracket, and to retrieve the name, it's still using column notation, so it can only be 0 or 1. So if I want to get the name, it's still going to be 0. to the first, or the first index, which in this case, remember is length minus 1. So 1 is going to be really the last value, because we only have a length of 2 in this case. And 0 to denote that I only want the first column, which in this case is going to be Bob. So my best bet, and I'm going to show some examples, but it's to just play around with this, create your own scenarios, and just try it out. But I'm also going to go over some examples, but this is an example that you can use as a reference as well. So in Python, a list comes with predefined functions called methods that we can use to manipulate or insert data into the list. So we have append, extend, insert, remove, and the list goes on, and I'll place a link in the description to my blog post as well as official Python documentation to better describe each one of these methods. But we'll do some examples for some of these, or the most used methods, in the coding section of this tutorial, which is next. Just want to show you guys the options that you guys have out of the box for a list. Alright, so let's see a list in action. So to create a list in Python, let's create a variable. We can make this equal to, first we got to open up a square brackets, and now we have a list. We have an empty list. But if we want to start placing some data inside of this list, we can just start adding it. So we can just place number 5 inside, and all the data is comma separated. So if we want to add another value, then we could just use a comma and then place another value. So I want to place a string of geo, or if I want to place another value, say for instance I want a boolean, I could just put another comma and place true, and another number value, or a float, use 5.5. So as you guys can see, everything is comma separated, and it can take in different types of data. It's not just specific to only one data type. Now, if I want to access the value within this list val variable, like I said in the explanation video, or explanation portion of the video, we could just use the index of the data. So I know that geo is the second value within this list val. So all I gotta do is do 2 minus 1, because we know that indexing in Python starts at 0 and increments by 1. So if I want to get access to geo, I know that 5 is 0 and geo will be 1. So I can just do list val, or I can just, let me print this out first. Print, and I can do list val, open up the square brackets, and place the index of the value. So geo is at index 1. Save this, and then I can do Python, and we just do index, run that, and boom, we see geo. So anytime you want to access a value inside of this list, we'll just have to open up some square brackets and place the index value. Now, just like with a string, we can slice it. So if we want to have a subsection of the actual list, we can do that. So we can just open up another print statement and do list val. And say for instance, I want to start from the beginning, so I want to include 5, but I only want to go up to true. So I want to exclude 5.5. I know I can just do first, because I want the initial value, I don't have to specify 0. I can just put the colon, and I want to include 3 values, right? So I know I can do, there's 4 values in this index, or in this, there's 4 values in this list. So I can just do from the beginning up to 3, because I'm not going to include 3. When it does slicing, it doesn't include the actual last value. So let's just save this and run it, and you'll see that it creates another list, but it only includes up to true, because although we do have an index of 3, which is 5.5, when we do slicing, we don't include that. If we want to include the last value as well, we can either just remove the value and it will just take from the beginning to end, or we can just increase it by 1. We're just gonna make it 4, and boom, you'll see that it added 5.5. So just like what we can use with a string, we can do with the list, because at the end of the day, they're both sequences. A string is a sequence of characters, and a list is just a sequence of data. Now, a list does come with predefined functions already created, and they all do different things. So for example, if we want to add another value to the end of this list, Python already has a function created called append. So to have access to this function, we just do the name of the variable that's holding the list, and we could do dot, and you can see the different functions or different methods that come with this list. So we're going to just use dot append, and we want to increment another value, and I want to increment the number 7. Now if I print out this list, we shall see that it is there. So let me just clear this out, run it again, and boom, we see that 7 is now appended from the initial list to the end of the list. Now say for instance we want more control and we want to insert it at a specific place, we could do that as well. We can use the dot insert. So just take the instance of the list again and use dot insert, and now we can specify the actual location that we want, or the index at which we want to insert the value. In this case, I want to insert it at the beginning, so I know the beginning index is 0, and I want to just put in a string, and I'm just going to call this insert at beginning. I think that's how you spell beginning. And then if I run this again, and let me just move this print to right here, I shall see that boom, it slides everything over, and now I have insert at beginning at the beginning of the list. Perfect. Now if I want to clear everything out, like I want a full reset, then I can use the list.file that I use clear, and this clears out everything in the list. If I print it out, then I shall see nothing. It's just an empty string or empty list. And another popular one is if you want to take out the last value, because we just did the append right here. But if we do, let's remove this clear. If we do dot pop, this just removes the last value in the list. Now when using dot pop, it lets us know what value is being removed from the list. So in this case, what's being returned is 7, because the last value in the list was 7, and it's letting us know that 7 is being removed. So if we print that out, we just get up to 5.5 because 7 was popped out. So these are an example of some of the methods that come with a list, and I'll leave a link in the description to the rest of the methods that you can use, and you guys can go around and play with it. But they're very useful, especially when you start getting into different scenarios in which you will use a list to store a large amount of data. So if you want to store the data and sort it, that's possible. Or if you want to reverse the order of it, that's also possible. So you guys can just play around with the methods, but these are the more popular methods I use with a list. Alright, so let's take a look at nested lists. So we're going to have a variable called player list, and we're going to make that equal to a list. And this is going to be the list that's going to hold the players. So I'm going to create another list of the actual player, and it's the name and the number of the player. So I'm going to create the first one called Geo, and he's going to have a number of 7. List are commas separated, so I place a comma right here, open up another one called Bobby, and his number is going to be 18. And just to add another example, we'll add Joe, and his number is 3. All commas separated, and we reach the end. Now, to retrieve a value from this nested list, we got to first just imagine in our brain so it can be a little bit easier for us. So as you guys can see, it's going row by row by row. We got to realize that in Python, the index of each row obviously starts at 0, and then it increments by 1. So to get access to this first row of data, we got to open up a bracket. So let's create a print statement, right? And we'll just open that up, and we're just going to get the instance of the list, which is player list, and we're going to open up our first square bracket, because this is going to be to access the rows. So in this case, I want to have access to the first row, so I'm going to use 0. So let's print this out. Let's see what it actually returns. I think this will help us get an idea of how it looks. So let's do Python index, and then we shall see that what it returns is the first list, the first row in the list, right, in the multi-dimensional list. Right, so now this helps us imagine it even better. So now that I'm getting returned a list, right, by using this first square bracket, right, I'm just going row by row now. How do I get access within the list that's being returned? Okay, let's open up another square bracket, right? Now we have access to the columns. So you can see that the first column is the name, and the second column is going to be the numbers of the player. So if I'm already accessing the first row, okay, what do I want within the columns? In this case, I want the name of the player. So I'm just going to use 0 because I want the first value within the column, right? Because it's still going to be the index is still going to start at 0 and increment by 1. So if I know there's only 2 values within the columns, like the length of the column is only 2, then I know to get the first index it's going to be 0, and the max index I can go is 1. So to get the name, I just do 0, 0, because I know it's row and then column. You guys can't see my mouse, but column. So I can see name and I can see number. And you guys can see here, name, number. So if I want to get the name, I just got to get the first value within this list that is being returned. So I just use 0. And if I run that, boom, I get Geo. Now, if I want to get the second row, right, and that's going to be Bobby, I just got to change the number, the first square bracket number to 1. Because remember, it's starting at 0, so you just got to subtract it by 1. So in this case, we know the length of this whole list that's holding all these different other lists is going to be 3, because there are 3 entries in this list. So we just got subtracted by 1. So if I know I want to access the last value, it's just going to be 3 minus 1. It's going to be 2. If I want 2, it's just going to be 2 minus 1. It's going to be 1. And if I want the first instance, it's just going to be 1 minus 0. Or 1 minus 1, which is going to be 0. So if I want the second column, which is going to be the number, all I got to do is increase it by 1. So I want to get Bobby's number, which is the second row, second column, and I run this, and boom, 18. So all you gotta do is just play around with it, but you guys can see, like, once you imagine in your brain, like, you guys will get a better understanding. First, print out the actual row that you want, and then try to get the column that you want. So that is a nested list.